We're almost at. Is that? Is that accent even allowed anymore?
Which one? The
Like
Japanese
an Asian accent? Yeah, Japanese accent.
I mean, if Shia LaBeouf can play,
come to my village, and I need your help.
what do you need?
All I have to
Dragon
offer
Slayer?
is rice.
Yeah, all I have is rice.
All I have is rice. Here we go. What's going on, everybody? Critic and the Common Man here. Special episode today. We're going back in time a little bit here. We are reviewing The Seven Samurai. Very famous, very, very famous movie. 1956 is the date that I have this one showing. Going way back for this. Chris, you picked this movie for
56 or 54?
I got 56 when it was in theaters. It very well could have been made in 54.
That's probably
That's possible.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
This is definitely the oldest film I've ever watched. I've never seen a film this old. I was kind of blown away by the quality of it, to be honest with you. I would give a spoiler warning, but I think when a movie's been out for as long as this one has, if you haven't seen it by now, you're on your own. Sorry to ruin this one for you. Talk to us about this one, Chris, a little bit. Get us started, because obviously you've said that you saw this one before in school when you were kind of studying film and stuff. I can see why teachers and whoever would kind of assign this to you. What do you think of this movie? Why were you interested in us watching this?
Well, it's kind of one of those things, it's a classic, man. This is a movie that is made by easily one of the most notable directors of all time, Akira Kurosawa. And I wanted to watch it because it's a cultural experience, like in a sense, like in the film sense, not necessarily like a Japanese cultural experience, but it's just one of those things that you have to watch it. You have to watch this movie, especially if we're going to be, reviewing movies. Like we need a base in order to start kind of like going from. And I think it's important as what we're doing, to watch and appreciate some of the older films and see the lengths that film history has gone through. And on top of that, dude, it's just such a good movie. It's just so, it's one of those movies where you expect it, because it's black and white, expect it to be slow and boring. And it really does a good job of keeping you entertained. Mind you, the pacing is a little slow, but that's because the pacing today is way different than it was then.
Yeah, it's a long movie too. I mean, this is a 3.5 hour movie.
3 hours and 27 minutes.
Right, you don't see that. If you do see that nowadays, it's got to be for a big movie.
Yeah.
It's got to be for like a big time special event, an Endgame type film. I think it's fair to say that a lot of movies back then were a lot longer. It was much more of an event to go and see these films, whereas today people will go to see a movie just for a couple hours in the afternoon and move on.
Well, back in the day, you would go to see multiple movies, and it was also a way for you to get your news. The intros and I believe the intermissions would show like news, especially like 1954. In the 40s especially, like they were showing clips of like what was happening in the war, in Europe. And that's how people would get a lot of their news. They would go to the movie theater, watch a movie to like escape, but they would also get their news from that. It's an interesting movie, this one. And you have to take into account the fact that at the same time that this movie came out, where this movie is making jokes about him losing his virginity, about, you're seeing people speared, you're seeing blood. At the same time that this is happening, you're not allowed in America to show two people share a bed if they're not married. You're not allowed to swear. You're not allowed to show anything that isn't, that is in any way could be construed as communist. There's oh good God, what is happening? There's a lot of rules that were set in place at the time in America that you had to follow if you wanted to be a film. If you wanted to put the film out, okay, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. Meanwhile, Kurosawa puts this film out that is showing pretty much the opposite of everything that we're told, and you can see why it was appealing, and to just show such a powerful, compelling story. These villagers who just want to live a peaceful life, and they turn to whoever they can for help, and they give everything that they have and sacrifice their own health basically to find these warriors who in turn see some promise in them, train the village and help them fight back, and they give everything for it. And in the archetypal sense, it's a compelling story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was funny because as I was watching this, and I was a little hesitant because I'm thinking, okay, here's one of those films that, yeah, people say they love it. It's like a cult classic. And then I'm thinking I'm going to watch it and not really like it. But it didn't feel like a 1950s film to me. If you had never told me when this movie came out and had me watch it, I definitely would have picked. I would have picked it. I would have put it as a much more recent film than that. I mean, I think, obviously it's in black and white. This review's in black and white, just, to fit the theme. But I think I would have probably put it somewhere in even maybe the 70s because the story felt so modern. And I think what was actually happening, what I started to realize as I was about halfway through this film is the reason why a lot of this feels so modern and feels like it still works so well is because we're probably still seeing films that are taking things from movies like this and redoing them today. Like this plot didn't seem like it was out of touch at all. Our village is being attacked. We need to go and hire help, and we need protection. We've seen plots like that multiple times in movies. This is not an unheard of thing. But back then, that was kind of setting the standard. And I don't know if this film, The Seven Samurai, is based off of a book or based off of something that came like a story that came before it. I'm not sure. Maybe it was just based on folklore and tales, and they kind of made a movie out of this. Mm-hmm. But it still felt relevant because I think movies today are still taking a lot from classics like that and putting them into film today. How they shoot things, how they tell a story, what kind of story it is, how they move the plot along. This movie kind of had it all, and I think it's because it set the bar. Being in the 1950s, 1956, it was able to set a bar for film moving forward. I thought that was kind of fun to see and pretty impressive to watch as we were going through this.
I mean, you're right. Like, a lot of stuff is definitely taking from this. I'll put it simply, man. If there was no Kurosawa, there would be no Star Wars. Like,
really,
the Jedi Knights, dude. Their code that they live by and everything, that is all based on samurai. True. And if this movie hadn't come out, I don't know that we would have the Star Wars that we have today. If anything, like this is one of those movies that I guarantee you George Lucas watched and studied in his film school, and I don't know that he would have taken the inspiration or had the idea for Star Wars if it wasn't for this film.
Do you have any reference for how this film was received? Like, have you read anything about how this film did when it first came out? I mean, was this released in Japan? How did this film come to be so popular?
I mean, I'm sure that it was released in Japan first, just because it was created at the time. Back in the day, so you had the movies that were created in America. Hollywood had that code. Right. It was called the code. And that's where, you have all those sets of rules that you had to follow because they didn't want anything to feel un-American. But foreign films were doing the opposite. Foreign films at the time were exploring things. German Impressionism was big, where you have some weird movies coming out. The French were making some experimental films, and Italy was going through this whole phase of like post-war, and they were making some really dark movies on like the realism of life, because their entire country had been destroyed by World War II. And so you have this shift in perspective overseas of what movies should be because of World War II. World War II very easily affected everything that happened in cinema. And America, we were kind of trying to avoid talking about it because of the Cold War and everything that was going on. They wanted things to kind of like, they wanted to put out movies that were like, hey, America, everything's fine. But everybody else was putting out these very interesting artistic pieces like this one. And so it's hard to say how it was received here because I don't really know. But this is one of those movies that was put out by someone in the post-war era to show the realism of war. And you can kind of see that. I mean, you can see the influence that World War II might have had on Kurosawa. And I mean, this is a director who's creating a movie after not even 10 years after the atomic bombs were dropped in his country, like,
right.
You have to see that a lot of the horror and stuff that they were witnesses to kind of portrayed in this. And you see that in the poverty and the anguish that these villagers are going through. I mean, you could go into like allegories and stuff like that. I could talk about this film forever. It's easy to see how you can write a paper about this movie, not just from a film sense, but also a historical sense. Why is it popular? It's really it's because of the archetype of the story, man. It's
Right.
it really is just about soldiers. It's about the warrior that's, trying to give his all for these people.
Well, and there's a fascination, I think, in the Western world with this idea of this samurai culture.
Romanticized.
It's kind of
yeah.
like how there was this fascination with the martial arts and with kung fu and how that became really big. There's almost something mystic about it or mythical about it. It's like you're talking about these soldiers that devote their lives to this code, and they're like renowned as probably being some of the best fighters of their time period, in the world. And this training that comes with it and this rigorous life that they lead. And then when you see it in film where they kind of they give these samurai characters and personalities. And it's, okay, we're going to go and get 7 samurai. And they, it's cool. Like they're all walking around and they're all kind of different. Some of them have these long like pikes. Others have swords. Others are, they give character to these different samurai. And it kind of brings that mystical sense of the idea of that kind of martial arts samurai character. It brings it to life.
Absolutely.
And it was interesting to me to see how, like you were talking about, how relatable this film could even be just in the subjects they touch on about, love and how desperate these people were and how they didn't really love their government and how their government wasn't helping them. And it just seemed like for a film that was made so long ago, it still feels relevant.
Yeah.
Like it still feels so relevant in just the things that it brings up. And I was blown away by the quality of the film, not just in the plot, but like the way it was shot and the audio and how they were able to set up the scenery and the stunt work and everything. Like it didn't feel overly cheesy to me, which is sort of what I expected when we were coming into this and watching a 1950s movie. I was expecting this movie to be overly cheesy, and there was some of that. Like,
of course,
they all had the like head things with the hair, which like, what was up with that? Like, was that just supposed to be like a cultural thing? Like everybody
the
had
shaved
hair?
head?
Yeah, like the shaved heads, but like you could see that it was like a headpiece on a lot of those people. Like it wasn't necessarily.
Yeah,
like,
I'm sure. It was the haircut of a samurai.
Gotcha. So they just, that was kind of like it was a more of like a something to fit the time, like something to fit the time more so than. Because I was watching that, I was like, that was the first thing I noticed that threw me off a little bit, was like they all had that like headpiece on with the hairstyle, but like you could see like the band on the forehead where like it clearly had been like put on. It was like a prosthetic kind of thing, which is fine. We're talking about 1950s here. I get it.
Yeah.
But that threw me off a little bit. And then just in some of the things like, somebody would make a joke and the laughing would be really over the top, or like the crying, it would be like very overly dramatic. Yeah. There was a little bit cheesy here and there, and I think a lot of the older films did that for a long time.
I think a lot of that has to do with the audio capabilities at the time, because you'll notice in a lot of older movies, you'll have 2 people sitting at a table and there'll be a vase on the table with some flowers or whatever. The microphone's in that vase. They didn't have things like this, So whenever they talk, they'll say their line and then get up from the table, or they'll get up and do their thing and then they come back. Oh, darling, and then they'll walk away. Like they have to lean into the microphone and kind of make sure that like, hey, you have to talk into the microphone.
Right.
And so
right.
a lot
so you
of
say
a
your
lot
line, then you get up and do something, then you come back.
Exactly. So a lot of the pacing and stuff feels weird. It feels a little robotic at times in older movies, because that was the capability they had. I mean, cameras were freaking huge. The audio capabilities that they had, were limited until later years. And so the laughing and everything had to be over the top to be heard, and that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, dude, it's hard also for anybody to sit down nowadays and watch a 3.5-hour movie. It's very hard, especially a movie like this where there's a lot of character development. There's a fair amount of dialogue. The plot takes a long time to kind of go through. Not to say that it's boring, but when you're used to, the Netflix original movies that are an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes, and it's action the entire time, it's hard to sit down and watch a 3.5-hour movie. But there is something refreshing about it, where you can kind of see the attention that was put into making the film and just the skill that was put into creating, what this film is. There's something to be said about, it's a long movie, but a good movie, and to make a 3.5 hour movie that still ends up being a really good movie, that says something to the scale of the director and the actors and the story.
Dude, even back then, they knew it was a long movie because they have an intermission.
Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
they knew what they were like. He knew that he was going into this creating a film that was probably one that had never been done before, and this was his longest movie that he'd ever made, and ever made later. Like all of his movies later and before came to be shorter than this one. But I think this is easily the film that Kurosawa became known for. This is the movie that made him the director that he's known to be. You know, like there are other movies that he's done, but Seven Samurai, there's and you said it. You know, there's this idea of what the samurai are and their code and everything that they live by. Absolutely, is a romanticized version because there was a lot of horror that came from being a samurai, and they even kind of touch on it that they were hunted.
Right.
Yep. Most samurai really lived by their own code. Like they had a code of chivalry that they had to live by. It was called Bushido, and it's the way of the warrior. But most samurai weren't like that. It wasn't a dedication to their people. It wasn't a dedication to their to anything more than the person that was paying them in the castle that they happened to live on their land. That was their
protect them.
Exactly. Like the samurai were paid warriors by the lord that they resided, you know, they're in their territory, and that's really the historical sense of it. There was a lot of fighting between clans and houses and castle to castle and stuff like that. And they touch a little bit on that in the movie, but this movie definitely shows a portrayal of a samurai in the romanticized version, in the same sense that the cowboys of movies of the same era romanticized what being a cowboy was. You know, it was the gunslinger that, you know, went into town to save people. Absolutely
right, the hero.
Not. Yeah.
Yeah, they paint every single one as a hero, and yeah, life was rough for a lot of those cowboys, man. It was not a life of luxury in any sense.
Yeah. But these are the movies that we think about as, you know, like to this day, man, like even in as a Jedi, you know, we love seeing them stand against opposing forces that, you know, they're the underdogs, you know, they are completely outnumbered, but, you know, as long as they have their blade and they have their training, they can do something with it. And that's absolutely what we're seeing in this movie.
It was just a compelling plot because you feel for these farmers. They have nothing.
When
they
their
grow
rice
barley.
gets stolen.
Right, their rice gets stolen. They come to steal all their barley, and they're just looking for protection, but they don't have anything to offer. They don't have money. They have nothing. And then, you know, you're following the story of these 7 basically heroes that come to get them. And the characters they set up in the samurai are very interesting in them of themselves. Each one of those 7 characters is very interesting.
Absolutely different, each one.
Yeah, absolutely different. Different motivation, different fighting style. But then also, even at, you know, towards the end, as they're actually fighting, the fighting part of this is really interesting too because of the strategy they employ. And again, we've seen those kind of things since this story has been retold. Yeah. But this is the kind of the original plot here where they're doing this, where they're laying this out. I was into this one big time. Again, it was hard to sit down and watch
after the intermission.
After the intermission, for sure. Once they get to the point where they're actually defending the farm, I was very interested. I was actually interested in the beginning too, although I will say it does get a little dry when they're in the village and you're kind of just learning about with the samurai. It does, that part kind of goes on for a while.
Yeah.
Because we're not used to that.
No,
you know, we're not used to an hour of the film just being a bunch of people sitting around talking for a while and then it gets to the action. I mean, that's just not really the pacing that we're used to.
Yeah.
So was this Kurosawa's first big work, or do you know, or was he already known for something else?
I don't think it was definitely not his first movie. I'm pretty sure he'd already kind of established himself as a director with some, like, what's the word I'm looking for? People already knew him. Like, his name was already out there, before and after. But this is the movie that people like. This is the art piece that made him and defined him as a director. And I'm sure there's people out there who are film buffs who are gonna disagree. But like, this is to this day, this is like, you think Kurosawa, you think Seven Samurai. That's
Yeah, absolutely. I'd heard of this movie before. I just never actually, I never actually got around to watching it, and I didn't realize, it was that long and everything. But what do you think of this as a foreign film, and then like where have foreign films kind of gone since this? I mean, did Seven Samurai spawn like a lot of popularity, you think, in people's people's ability or willingness to watch foreign films? And then do you think foreign films have gotten worse or better? Because personally, I would take Seven Samurai over a lot of international films that I've seen just in the last 10, 15 years. I felt like it just had something relatable to it, something kind of Hollywood to it, I almost want to say.
Yeah.
And that might not be fair. Maybe Hollywood took something from Kurosawa here, but it had that kind of Hollywood feel that made it more relatable and more interesting. And then I don't know if I can say the same about a lot of international films I've seen since that.
Yeah. So the thing about international films, like I said, is that they had more freedom
Right.
to try things, because they weren't. If you were a director from another country, you picked up a camera and you just kind of started shooting things. Like you looked for stories that you thought you could do, and you found the funding, and that was that. Like you didn't have to follow rules like in Hollywood and stuff. I don't necessarily think that the films, like international films today, have gotten worse. I think that there is still to this day that idea that an international film is going to push the limit. It's gonna tell a side of a story that you would normally see in Hollywood. Hollywood is very much a cookie cutter, and you and I have both seen it, and we've talked about it on this podcast. There is definitely a formula that we're seeing in Hollywood with, the release of films kind of all being the same. They're all
Over
unoriginal.
and over.
Yeah. But you look at foreign films, even on Netflix, you find foreign films. I guarantee you're going to find stuff that you haven't seen before. But the difference is that you're probably not going to lean towards watching that foreign film. One, because it's in another language more likely than not, and two, because you don't know anybody that's in it, and that's a subconscious thing. If we're just from the title and from the photo that's on the front and the actors that are in it, we are immediately as an audience judging that movie. And that's three things. If we don't know who's in it, we don't understand the language, and we don't really understand what the plot is, we're probably not going to watch it. Chances are it could be one of the best films you've ever seen, because it's going to touch on subjects that you never thought it would touch on. But you're probably not going to see it. And that's kind of another reason why I like picking foreign films and art films for the podcast and stuff, just to kind of expand our viewing, I guess, because there's a lot of films that I don't think I would watch if I didn't have to watch them.
It's sad, but I you take a movie like Seven Samurai, and you gotta wonder how many people are gonna watch Seven Samurai in the year 2050.
Yeah.
And I just don't know that it's gonna be that many, if anybody, because we've gotten so far away from this in every aspect in how movies are being made now, not only in the plot, but in the pacing and in the character development and the storytelling. Like you just said, I mean, there's very much a formula that's coming out now for these films, and it's straying further and further away from some of these classic movies that we really enjoy watching.
Well, you bring up character development. I think that this movie had some of the best character development because it took its time. And I think that's one of the things that kind of makes the movies of that time period. You watch a black and white movie from back in the day, and you'll see a lot more dialogue. And I think it's interesting because some of the best writing that you'll ever see in a movie comes from movies back then. You just every single moment that is on screen is thought carefully through, and every word that is said in a character's dialogue is very, very meticulously chosen. And I love this movie specifically for the character development because you learn so much about the samurai, each one's backstory. One of them's a farmer who wanted to be a samurai, and you don't know that until halfway through the movie. When he's lying about his nobility, and they're like, dude, you'd be 13 years old.
According to this, you're 13 years old.
And they were just laughing at him. And then we find out that this guy, what happened probably was that samurai came to his village and destroyed his village because they were being told by another lord, hey, we need you to go clear this village out or whatever. And his whole fucking world changed. And so what did he do? He decided to be the world's best samurai so that this shit would not happen again. That is epic. I think that is some of the best character writing. And to see the way he is, he really is a badass. And he still somehow has this like jovial sense. He's youthful and happy and brings this energy to the film. And then you have the older character, the one who joins up first, Katsushiro. I can't remember their names, and I feel bad butchering.
So. No, yeah, there's a lot.
But yeah, and just seeing the way he is, he's got very much like an Ip Man style kind of sagaciousness to him, where he's very wise and quiet and very much a fatherly figure, and kind of leads the group, because he's got the years of experience and stuff. Like each one has their own unique sense about them, and that is just, and you get that over the course of the 3.5 hours or whatever. Well, it's not even 3.5 hours, because it's an hour and a half and then intermission,
right,
and then battle. That's really what it is. And so it's just
there's
really...
no
Go ahead.
There's no expectation of you knowing anything about these people or this film going into it, and yet you still end up knowing so much about them and or being connected with them at the end. Like, they don't just drop a character in it and try to set up its backstory with all these stories and this and that. Like, they will actually show you and go through and develop these characters because, like you said, they take their time. And that's not to say that I think every movie should be 3.5 hours, because that's a long film to go through. But if you're really looking for serious character development, and then even in the battle at the end, I mean, they spent more time on that battle scene than a lot of movies spend on their entire movie for the half the time. I mean, they really, the training and the setup and the strategy and the fighting, and there's these brilliant scenes where the samurai are riding around, and the bandits are riding in on horses, and the audio is incredible, and they don't expect you to know anything going into this, and yet you come away from it being very connected to these characters still, because they take the time to set all of this up.
And the thing is, like, in modern day, we don't take 3.5 hours, or we barely take an hour for character development nowadays, with the way that movies are. But you wouldn't have gotten to that point if we didn't have movies like this one. Like, you had to learn from the steps, and the pacing had to grow. We had to analyze how audiences received certain films and why those films were received well, and write the papers and read the papers and develop all of that analytical, evidence basically on what makes a good film, and slowly over time get to the point that we are today, where we can create a character in 10 minutes, like Up, for example, in Disney's, in Pixar's Up, the first 10 minutes, there's no dialogue, but we understand the character from beginning to end in a montage scene, why he is grumpy and why he is the way he is for the rest of the movie. In about 10 minutes, we understand everything we need to know.
Right, but that entire character is developed. Right,
we wouldn't have gotten there if it wasn't for movies from back in the day, because we had to learn, and so pacing is different, but there's still so much to learn from these older movies. And
it's I just kept thinking as I was watching it, I just continuously kept thinking, man, I can't believe they were doing this back then. That's crazy. Like I can't believe they were doing all these things that we do today. Like this movie, this Kurosawa guy was really smart. He did the same thing that all these popular actors and stuff are doing now, and I couldn't help but think that. And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking, oh well, no, I'm getting this backwards. It's not that he was doing what we do now; it's that we are now doing the things that these kind of directors were doing back then. They set the bar, and that's been followed essentially.
And not just that, but like, dude, anime is straight up take like that scene between that samurai that they end up bringing on, the really quiet one. Where you see him and the other guy, and they're fighting and they're practicing with their wooden swords, and he's like, no, like, let's fight steel to steel, and he's like, dude, don't waste your life. Like, if you fight me with an actual sword, I'm going to kill you. And they still do that showdown, and you just see the two of them kind of readying themselves and just like kind of eyeing each other, and then they go at each other, and in one move he cuts him down. That is straight up, that is some anime shit. That is some shit we see in movies to this day. It is epic.
This day.
It is epic to have that showdown between one warrior that is clearly the better warrior, and still have that.
Well, and you got to give credit where credit's due. Like you said, like we see these things and we kind of take them for granted because they've sort of always been in the films that we watch now. But they had to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And Kurosawa, or maybe movies before him, but I'm assuming, he was one of the main people that kind of set these. He set these. What's the word I'm trying to think here? He set these kind of
expectations.
Expectations, yeah. He set these expectations for what these films are and what they're going to be, and he almost set these qualities in making this film. Like, dude, it starts raining in that movie, and the entire tone of that film. I don't know if it was actually raining or if they somehow like had the capability to like.
I wouldn't be surprised either
create
way.
that rain.
Either one is surprising.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Did you hear what I said? I literally just said, I was like, I wouldn't be surprised. Either one would be surprising. That was word for word what I said. That made no sense. Anyways, continue.
It's just the tone that this movie is able to set up. I was very impressed. Don't get me wrong, 3.5 hours was long, and there was parts of it where it started to kind of drag in the beginning, like in the first act, where I was like, oh man, like this is like I would pause it to go get some food or something. I'm like, Jesus, I'm only an hour in. I got 2.5 hours left. I got more time left than what most full-length movies are today.
Yeah.
But essentially, after that intermission, and even before I was interested, but after that intermission, you kind of forget how much time is going by, and you're pretty much into it the rest of the way. It is pretty gripping.
Yeah, and that's a pacing thing. Once you get past once you get past the intermission, the pacing is kind of what we expect it to be. It just felt like a really long climax that was enthralling. Because like now at that point we're like, holy shit, these guys are gonna die. But it does a really good job with the build up, and then, I mean, you can see the influences that this movie has had on even like modern day samurai movies, and the one that comes to mind for me is The Last Samurai. You can see the parallels between the two movies, especially in the battle scenes and stuff.
That's exactly what I was thinking of too. Even as I was watching this movie, I was like seeing some connections between The Last Samurai and The Seventh Samurai.
Yeah.
And again, I was just having this realization while I was watching this. Like, I'm not a classic film buff. I don't watch a ton of old movies. I don't really watch a lot of black and whites. So as I'm watching this, I'm starting to realize, well, this is where a lot of these modern cinema practices come from. Because people are doing this, and it was clearly successful in the 50s. So they're going to keep doing that. And you see this, especially in samurai movies, you see a lot of these same trends. And they just continue to do it successfully, but somebody had to set it up. And I can imagine that's why somebody like Kurosawa gets so much praise, because of what they were able to set up and establish here in a film like this.
And what's even more surprising is that when you think about it, it's 1954 when I think this movie was created. And you're right, it probably was released in America at 1956. But when you think about it, the movie industry has been creating films with story for about as long as you and I have been alive at this point.
That's crazy.
So it's been 30 plus years of cinema as like a storytelling medium, and then an additional 20 years of like cinema as like a what can we do with this camera kind of a thing.
Right.
But like storytelling and with like actual structure and stuff has only been around for about 30 years, maybe a little more than that. And you're already creating, these epic war movies. And you can absolutely see how this movie influenced movies like Spartacus and other epics from the time that kind of were brought to America. And so this is just an iconic movie that is just, it's a part of film history. And to this day still holds its own. And just knowing that the samurai that die at the end and the flag, when they put the flag up, that thing was freaking epic. And what it represents and everything, with the villagers, and they're like, well, who's this one? And like they were just making fun of him, and then just seeing the rain added such a dynamic to the movie, which I can't imagine was fake. I think that was...
I don't think it was.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it was.
I think that was just like...
I don't think they had the capabilities to have it be fake.
I think that was just... Kurosawa was like, well, it's fucking raining now, so we're going to have to do this. And to have a camera on a set like that where it's pouring rain, dude, that's an achievement.
Well, and you look at all the moving pieces in this, too. I mean, this film, you look at the cast list, it's already long enough just with main characters. Then you think of all the extras and soldiers and... you know, people riding horses, people fighting, people in the villages. I mean, the cat like
Hundreds
the
of people.
production must have been insane
Yeah.
to try and put this on.
Yeah. But
And it's hard to find negatives in this too, because every time I think of a negative, I have to kind of stop and I'm like, dude, this film was made in the 50s.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh well, like their headband things looked a little cheesy, and I'm like, dude, this film was made in the 1950s.
yeah.
Like this would pass as a good film today. You know, it was a black and white film that was made 70 years ago, just about.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it still was able to have that kind of an impact. It's really, really hard to find any genuine negatives about this movie.
When this movie came out, our great grandfathers or our grandfathers were coming back from fighting World War II.
Yeah. Yep.
There have been 3 or 4 wars since this movie came out, dude. It is again just a technological achievement, a film history achievement. It's a wonder, and it's in my opinion one of the best movies ever made to this day. Pacing and stuff aside, you know, like just the character development, the cinematography, the shots when you see the sword sticking out of the graves, those shots are incredible. The shots where they're fighting in the rain, they're epic. The sacrifices.
I would like to read up on Kurosawa a little bit and figure out a couple things. Like, one, how did he have the funding after the wars to fund making a movie like this?
Yeah.
And 2, where was his inspiration? And 3, how the hell did he go about putting this on? I mean, you got to think, you know, a country like Japan, after going through what they went through in this time, filmmaking, I don't think would be super high on their cultural list of things they wanted to do. So it just makes me interested in who this Kurosawa is as a person.
Yeah.
And where did this passion come from to make these films? And then how the hell was he able to actually do this?
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing that this person was in love with film so much that even after the devastation of his country and arguably the largest war that we've ever seen, he still found time to create his vision of you know.
And you got to imagine that he was making films before the war.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming he was probably a filmmaker before the war, and it was already his passion, of course. And then he, you know, I'm sure was put on hold with all of this during the war and everything. And then he was, you know, fortunate enough to survive. And I don't know how he was put in a position where he got the funding to get the cameras and equipment to go out and make this. But, dude, everything, even the music, like the score for this, as they're playing it, you can tell. It's a real band. It's a real, you know, small, sure, but a little orchestra that he put together that's actually playing this music that he has recording. I mean, it sounds like, you know, the audio quality sounds like you're at like a band concert and hearing people play. I mean, you can hear the slight imperfections just due to probably the equipment and the time and just, you know, where music was. It's not, you know, a Hans Zimmer score, but dude, this was in 1954.
Yep.
That they're making this. Again, where did they come up with all these people? Where did they find the actors? Where did he get the funding to do these cameras? And where did the passion come from or the inspiration come from to make this movie?
Yeah. And it's again, going back to that scene where the 2 samurai are like facing off against each other. I can't help but see that scene and compare that in my mind to seeing in the original Star Wars, Obi-Wan and Darth Vader facing off for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, just swords drawn, ready, you know. Again, this movie had such an impact on Hollywood that we probably don't realize. But it definitely set the tone for this romanticized idea of battle and how movies could portray that to this day. So, I mean, yeah, I could go on forever. That's what I have to say about this one, man. Like, it's a great movie.
Yeah, I'm really glad we watched it because I got to say, I was a little intimidated by it, and I didn't think I was going to like it.
It's intimidating as shit, yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, you see how long it is, and I think a lot of people, you know, you have these expectations that get set by the movies that are put out today because we get very fast-paced, high-energy, visually stunning films. I was blown away by this. I was blown away especially by the fact that it was made when it was made and still managed to be a movie this freaking incredible.
Yeah.
I'm glad I watched it. It is intimidating. I would even recommend if somebody wants to watch this and they're not, they're not used to watching older movies like this, watch it in segments. Watch an hour of it, then, stop, do something, then watch another hour of it, get to the intermission, then stop, and then finish it off. Because I guarantee you, that entire second act, you're not going to stop.
Yeah.
Once that second act starts, that's it. I understand how maybe it'd be a little tough to get through the first act just because the pacing is different than what we expect.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anybody's going to go into this movie and give it an honest shot and come out of it and being like, that was stupid. Why did we watch that? I don't think you would. I think it was phenomenal, and good luck finding some serious flaws about this movie. I just don't think they're there.
Yeah.
But that's fun. I mean, this film, you'll like this, Chris. This was interesting to me. For the first time, I've never seen this before. Seven Samurai got a 100% critic score. Yeah. Now, this is Rotten Tomatoes, so take it with a grain of salt if you want, but a 100% critic score, 97% audience score. I understand 100% where that's coming from. Talk us through how you feel this movie is, how you rate it. Obviously, you have history with this movie. This movie means a lot to you, and just it being in the field that you're in, it means a lot to you as well. But how would you rate this one? Let us know what you think.
So, again, this is so against the conventional Hollywood style that was around at the time. So right away, you get points for breaking the mold and for being original. The technology around at the time was a challenge for him, I'm sure. And somehow he was able to create these incredible shots, iconic shots. Again, the sword sticking out of the graves, the shots of the flag, the close-ups that he had to get, the interior shots, the set he had to build, the costuming, the amount of extras, all of the moving pieces that he had to kind of work through in a war-torn country. It's an achievement in and of itself. The cinematography was incredible. The story development was great. The character development was top notch. And at the time, even though it was long, he knew people were going to sit down and watch it because, one, it's a foreign film. If you're going to watch a Kurosawa movie, you know what you're in for. And the romanticized feeling that you get of this like warrior culture, on top of the fact that, again, these warriors are sacrificing not because they're being paid or anything, but just because they believe in what they're doing. And they believe in their leader. Really, ultimately, that's what it is. They're all following that one samurai who is telling them, you guys, we're doing this. Like, he tells them from the get-go, this is not for rank. This is not for money. You're getting food. Are you with us? And there are samurai who said no. This group of samurai are there because they believe in what they're doing. They believe that this is going to be the thing that, this is their destiny, ultimately. And most of them give their lives for this village. And it's heartbreaking. It's jaw-dropping with some of the scenes, the horses, the spears. I don't know how they got that to look realistic where they're stabbing people.
It's crazy.
Absolutely, I understand how this gets a 10 out of 10, and it gets a 10 out of 10 for me, because for a 1954 film, a 1954 film to be able to do what it did. The only downside that I have with it is pacing, and that's something that I can't fault it on because it came out in 1954. The pacing was different.
Yeah,
you're not going to see a black and white movie that doesn't have that pacing issue.
Yeah, that's true. You heard it here first, folks. A 10 out of 10 from the critic.
Citizen
I get
Kane,
it, man.
I think it's like 4 hours. I just want to say that. I can't remember how long it is, but Citizen Kane is the same thing. And it's all dialogue. And it's considered the best movie ever. So anyways.
Yeah, that's true. I get it. I was a little skeptical going in. I'm thinking, okay, is this actually that good, or is this one of these cult classic movies where like a lot of people like it, I'm not really going to love it kind of thing? It was damn good. The pacing is something that you're going to have to adjust to. It's a long movie, but it's going to feel more modern than you think it is if you've never seen this before. If you're watching this review, you of course have. Let us know down below what you think. Now, my score coming in, I was pretty blown away. I was blown away by the capability of this movie to do what it did visually, audibly, the story that it told, how modern it felt for something so old. The pacing was a little off for me, and again, I agree with you. It was just kind of a movie of the time. I loved it. It's like, again, good luck trying to find faults with this. Good luck trying to find faults with this as you go. It just, for what
faults
it is, if you're not somebody... Too. Right, like real, genuine faults, like, oh, I didn't like this guy. Well, I mean, okay, that's the character, I suppose, but This was damn impressive, and when you consider the time and what had just happened in the world, and for this person to come out and, Kurosawa to come out and make a movie like this, it was pretty phenomenal. Visually, it's stunning. The action scenes are incredible. I can't really think of any negatives. Was it a little bit slow for me? Yes. As the common man, not looking at this as a critic, I think I give this one a 9 out of 10. And the only reason it doesn't get a 10 out of 10 for me is because if you're just somebody who's not used to this, like me,
yeah, absolutely,
and you go to sit through this movie, it's going to feel a little bit long.
Yeah.
I'll warn you that now. But again, if I'm looking at this from a critic point of view, it's a 10 out of 10. From somebody who's just, if I'm recommending this to someone who's just not a film buff, not somebody who's super into film, that they're used to watching the movies of today, you sit down, a 16-year-old kid and tell them, hey, that's a little ridiculous because, of course, they're not going to love it. But you sit somebody down who's never seen a movie like this before and you say, watch this movie. I think the only thing you're going to hear from them is that they think it's a little slow.
Yeah.
Other than that, for a black and white film, it is phenomenal, and I am so glad that we ended up watching this one because
is ultimately what
it's an art piece for sure.
And that's the thing.
It's an art piece for sure.
You're gonna have people who don't like it, but
Yep.
you don't go and say that the Mona Lisa sucks. It's
Right.
It is a priceless piece of history that is considered one of the best paintings by one of the best painters in the world. It's what it is. And this film is like that. It's not everybody is gonna say that they enjoyed it. You go to the Mona Lisa and like, oh, it's smaller than I thought it would be, or, I can see some of the cracking on the, on the canvas or whatever. It's the Mona Lisa is old. It's going to have imperfections. It's not going to have the same color. They have to restore it. It's smaller than it was, but there's history that comes with it and significance that comes with it. And it's an art piece that has to be seen as that. And it's the same with this movie, man. It's what I'm saying is that this is the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, this is the Mona Lisa. Dude, but I'm with you, though. Again, as somebody just coming in off the couch and saying, I've never watched a movie like this, let me give it a shot. I'm used to watching Netflix originals and Marvel movies and superhero movies. And then you go to this, it's a big change of pace. I think when you sit down and you watch this, the only thing people are going to say is it's a little long, which, again, if I was a critic looking at this, I wouldn't care. But it's a little long for somebody who's not used to that. That's the first thing. And then it's a little over dramatic with some of the interactions and the characters and stuff, which is a cultural thing and a timepiece thing. So to me, it's a 9 out of 10 movie, which is a fucking high score, man. I mean, that's not, it deserves that. And that's somebody just coming in and off the couch and watching this. So I'm thrilled that we watched it. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to think. A 9 and a 10 from us, those are high scores. Obviously, if you're watching this long of a video on it, you've seen it. Drop a comment down below and let us know what you think of this one. If you like what we had to say, we really appreciate a thumbs up. It doesn't take long. Just give us a click. If you're just watching this for the first time, go check out some of our other videos. If you like what we have to say, we'd love a subscribe. This is what we do. We have a lot of fun with this podcast. Chris, you got anything else for this one? I don't think we're going to jump into a current event because it just feels wrong to throw a random current event in on top of this kind of a movie. I think we're going to leave this review alone. But you got anything for this one, or is that it?
No, I mean, the only thing I would say to anybody who hasn't seen it and is wanting to give it a shot, if they're interested in it, turn your brain off. Follow along for the little bit, take the intermission, take a break, get some food, and then come back and finish the movie because the second half of the movie is really where it shines. And just enjoy the ride, for the characters and what they are, like if you go into it seeing it as kind of like almost like an anime, like I guarantee you'll love it because it really feels like that. It has that hero warrior epicness to it that So that's what I have to say. It's,
Cool. Chris, edit the rain starting on us, please, so we can
cue rain.
Get our real dramatic feel going on. All right, that's it, you guys. This was Critic and the Common Man, the review of The Seventh Samurai. Incredible movie. We're glad you guys watched it. If you're still with us, drop a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. We out of here, Chris?
Yeah, stop the rain.
Stop the rain. We're out of here. So long, everybody. See you next time.